One thing that I did want to just mention in the beginning of this talk is that now that we're in the 15th conference, it dawned on me that there are presenters here that were just children when ISIS first began. So that's really something, isn't it? And it won't be long, and there will be people presenting there who are younger than ISIS. So that's fantastic. I'm very pleased. I want to talk about elephants and horses and their similarities, and how understanding not only the biology of elephants and aspects of their behaviour, but also understanding the position of elephants within the human domain can really help inform us about the current issues we have with horses. So when I talk about the ISIS communication crisis, I'm not talking about one that's within ISIS, hopefully. I'm talking about how we project what we want to teach people about horses and about caring for them and all the aspects of that. So I'll be talking a little bit about social license, but just before I do, by the way, of course, I'm talking about Elephas maximus, the Asian elephant, because that's all my work has been with the Asian elephant. I haven't worked with African elephants. So I'll leave it at that. So just, good, this is working. Domestication it's interesting to see how long it is comparatively that we've domesticated horses and elephants, and you'll see it's fairly similar. It's something, 5,000 to 6,000 years for horses and just a bit less than that for elephants. It could be, of course, more than that. We really don't know. It's just really educated guesswork from the evidence available. But there are many other species that we've had for a fairly long time too, even silk moths, which was amazing, and bees are relatively recent. But you can see that it's quite a long journey we've had with horses, and the difference between horses and elephants is that horses are domesticated animals, however we define it, and elephants are supposedly not, because even though they're within the captive elephant, there are almost half the elephants in Southeast Asia are actually captive elephants. So it's a very different position to the African elephant. African elephants outnumber Asian elephants 10 to 1 as well. So they're quite endangered, the Asian elephant, and when you consider that half of them are in captivity, that's really something. So just moving on to look at, there we go, the differences between the two species, and looking at safety considerations. We do know horses are a dangerous critter. The death rate is something like 0.5 to 1 death for every million head of population. The serious injury rate that requires hospitalisation is something like 1 serious injury for every 350 hours of contact, whereas the serious injury rate for motorcycling is only 1 serious injury for every 7,000 hours of contact. So it's 20 times more dangerous. And children have a higher incidence of injury, and it's also important to say that horses have been implicated as being responsible for 61% of those accidents. And so then when we look at elephants, there is unfortunately a distinct lack of data, but I've been trying to get more information as much as I can through the government in India, which is the place where there's, these deaths have largely been recorded, particularly in the south. And there isn't that much data available, or at least supplied to me. The Elephant Lovers Association is one set of figures that I managed to procure. And in Kerala, which is one of the southern states of India, there is something like 23 mahout deaths per year. Mahouts are, of course, the people who work with elephants. And interestingly and sadly, 3 times as many elephants are killed due to injuries in training and because of the way it's done. And I'll move into that space now. You see, because for both species, horses and elephants, in history we've always talked about making the animals submissive, and that's true with both species. There's very little difference in the approaches, the traditional approaches, that if you didn't make it submissive, then it wasn't ever going to be of service. And so it resulted in a lot of these sort of dastardly techniques, and which still happen in horses across the planet. Horses are still hobbled, and many horses get injured doing that. I know in Australia I was asked to comment on a case where horses' front legs were tied to a wire fence for some dental work, not by a local dentist, not a vet. But in the same vein, elephants also are typically restrained during the early training of them, and it may be that they're tied front legs to a tree, back legs to a tree for many days or even weeks, or they may be put in a pen. In some parts of Southeast Asia, they're in the pen for up to 100 days, and then they're usually hit and poked until they don't react anymore, and then they're led between two older elephants and a rider will jump on. And the belief is that the elephant already knows what he's meant to do. You just have to make him submissive enough to do it. And that's the problem. I didn't realize this until I was working in Nepal back in 2006, and I asked the elephant vet there why he was questioning me about what's the point of teaching them anything. And I said, well, you know, you have to teach them, you know, they have to learn. And I said, why would you think it'd be any different? And he said, well, we believe the god Ganesh gave us the elephant to serve us, and all we have to do is make it submissive enough to do it. And you see, it suddenly struck me that that's not that much different to many of the ideas in the West about horses, because the belief is that if you just ride it well or whatever, there's not that much emphasis in the past in textbooks about training. Much of the emphasis is about riding, and so much of it has been about respect and dominance and those sorts of things. And the way we've worked with horses over the years, since the very start of our ventures with horses, is that, you know, working with them, using them for war or agriculture, has supplied us with a narrative about horses that we use commonly. We talk about horses that are loyal. We talk about horses that have a work ethic, you know, as if. We talk about horses that have a will to win, and we talk about nowadays horses that cooperate with us in a partnership, because the leisure industry with horses is now a much more recent phenomenon. So what's happened is that this has led to a way of understanding horses through that narrative, and that's partly responsible for all of the descriptors we use of horse behaviour and the way we interact with them and the way we blame them for what they don't do and the way we praise them for what they do. So when we look at this new idea, relatively new idea about social license to operate, which is basically that, you know, all codes and all animal industries are subject to the same rising community expectations of welfare and the community's reassessment of practices. And that's a very important thing to remember, because as much as what we think as scientists and as much as what horse people want to do or elephant people want to do, the real judgment is from the public, and that's the driver of change, and we need to remember that. And that's where we have to recognise that we need to be ahead of the game. We need to be ahead of these expectations, so that if the strong arm of legislation comes down, it comes down very hard. For example, with our greyhound racing, when people refused to, you know, improve their practices, suddenly it was banned in New South Wales for some time at least, but now it's under very heavy scrutiny. And the same thing is happening, and that's why the elephant is very much, in a way, the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, because there's such a strong move about not riding elephants, and that's been a more recent phenomenon. You know, 10 years ago it was fine to ride elephants. And so the early part of my work in Southeast Asia was actually training elephants to be ridden, and that's not happening anywhere near as much because the public don't want that. And So we need to recognise that. These are the sorts of posters that are put up everywhere. But by the same token, some of you might have seen that in some parts of the Western world there are already advertisements imploring us not to ride horses at all either. And so that's certainly on the horizon. And when we look at the need for change in horses, we can see there are so many problems. You know, we've got the issues of money and medals and all these other issues then that lead people to do the things that they do to win money and medals. You know, that hyperflexion, whipping, nose bands, tongue ties. Jiggers are an electrical apparatus that you use to make horses to go faster. Oh, I shouldn't say you use, that one shouldn't use. But they are fairly, they're not uncommon in the horse racing industry. And of course it really has a very bad effect. Interestingly enough, just one small story about the use of about the whip. Some years ago, Paul McGreevy rang me and said, and I hope he's watching this on live stream, so thank you very much, Paul. Rang me and said, would I be interested in doing a TV program for Catalyst, which is on our ABC, which is like the BBC. You know, it's not fake news, well, not so much fake news. It's the real deal. And so it was going to be about whipping, he said. And I said, oh, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And he said, well, you know, you've got the facilities down there at the Australian Equine Behaviour Centre. And I said, no, that's fine. Little did I realise what they wanted me to do. And so Catalyst, I'd already worked with Catalyst through other projects with elephants, for example. And Jonica Newby from Catalyst rang me and said what she proposed to do, and she wanted me to whip her. Now, the Australian rules of racing have changed the whip. It's now a padded whip. And she wanted me to whip her with a padded whip on TV. So to see if it hurt. And now, you know, I was really dumbfounded, and I said yes. And and then I put my head in my hands and said, Andrew, what have you done? This is awful, because not only was I going to whip her, and there was no reason for whipping her. She's a very nice lady. I like her a lot. Not only was I going to whip her with the whip, but I was also going to then use my thermal camera on her leotards to inspect the the site where it was whipped and see the effect of the whip. And I thought, this is really too much. And being one of I have 3 brothers, and you know, I'm one of the older ones, so I thought, this is perfect. I'll ring my brother Jonathan, and I'll ask him if he'd like to be involved in a TV program. And so he said, yeah, that would be good. And so he came over on the day when they arrived with all the equipment. And when he realised he was going to have to whip Jonica Newby, he gave me this look, and then he mouthed, "You bastard," to me. Anyway, then he whipped her, and he only hit her once, and she said it didn't hurt, and I took a thermal picture of it, and well, you could see it, but it wasn't that significant. And I said, "You're going to have to really hit her a lot harder than that, Jonathan." And she was okay with that. She said, yeah, it didn't really hurt, so she'd do it again. So he whipped her again a good deal harder, and she said it still didn't hurt that much. And I said, look, Jonathan, what the problem is with the whips is at the moment, what many of the jockeys are doing is they're using the shaft of the whip. So you're going to have to, you've got to have a third go at this. And Jonica's up for it, so don't worry, you know, she said it was fine. And he said he really had strong recriminations about this. He didn't want to do it, and I said, you've got to do it. It's science. So anyway, he did. And it was on TV. So if you want to see this, it's on, if you look up ABC Catalyst whip, it's still there. Anyway, that was one of our little forays into whip use. And when I'm talking about the canary in the coal mine, you know, there are already moves using that elephant situation to say, well, what about horses? Why is horse riding so good? So we need to be aware of that. And I think there are good reasons why we can ride horses. You see, the problem for me is I don't think riding elephants is in any way a benchmark of welfare. I think bad riding and bad training is. But if elephants are well trained and trained through the use of positive reinforcement, and our elephants that we train in, certainly in India where they are in forest situations, in the jungle or in Nepal, they do leave when they feel like it, because we don't have ropes or chains. They just bugger off into the bush, and we don't see them again. And then they pop back when they feel like it for more, and they hang around. The important thing is that if you do it well, I don't think it's a problem. But the real problem comes now, because when the elephants are now not ridden, they tend to spend the whole time, you know, chained up. Tourists come to feed them, so they're now fed really bad diets with far too much sugar, bananas and palm sugar and sugar cane, and the elephants are now becoming quite obese. And you can see quite a lot of obese elephants, and I'd never seen them before, as I saw in Southeast Asia, in Thailand. You know, elephants that are so fat and round that they've got lumps on them. And we do know that obese elephants, there was at the conference last year on elephant welfare in Lampang, showed that the obese elephants have high cortisol levels. Whichever way, it's not good for them. And also, when elephants were being used for riding, they were getting some social interaction, they were getting some exercise, and now they're not. And the tasks that they're doing are also part of the elephant narrative. You know, aren't elephants so clever? You know, they're painting, and I mean, they're painting better than I can paint. And I don't really see how that's possible, because you know, I've done art at school and I still wasn't very good. But when you see how it goes, we always see the elephant's head, but actually people are guiding the elephant to do the drawing. So the elephant's reinforced somehow for holding the paintbrush, and it is quite clever with the way they learn it, to dab, dab, dab for dots, and they can do strokes, but somebody's actually doing the drawing behind the scenes, and you can see it here. Oh, sorry, I'll turn my sound down. However I do that. Can we turn the... just so I can talk. You can see the guy there's holding the elephant. Sometimes they hold them on the cheekbone, sometimes occasionally with a nail. But when I saw quite a few examples, it was basically just holding the tusk of a male elephant or the jawbone. But the thing is, it is just really beguiling to the public, and they think they cheer and they clap, but that's all the elephant does. And then he goes back, he walks another 20 metres and goes back to his pen, and he doesn't get much other interaction, and there's no social interaction with other elephants when he does this. So that's a problem. So it's not always just the perfect answer to say let's not ride them. As I said, if we controlled it, and I'll show you some examples of that. But one of the reasons that elephant riding has become so abhorrent is because of what has happened in some of these places where they're used as temple elephants. Now, so I took a trip to Gurriavur when I was working in Kerala to actually see what goes on. Now, all these elephants, if you can see, there's actually they're covered in these gold masks, and there are parasols and people standing on them, people sitting underneath them, but it's scorching heat, and they're there for hours. Now, to the credit of the Indian government, I have to say elephants are not allowed to be used for entertainment purposes in most states of India, and in some places they're still having their ceremony, but now without the elephants, which is a good thing. But I videoed this, and this is the video I took, and I was behind one elephant, because not only do they have to put up with the sun in this ceremonies, but also a lot of cacophony, a lot of really loud music, and then actually fireworks. And then people wonder why elephants suddenly turn into lunatics and want to start killing people, and that's one of the most common places where people are injured. So I was standing here. I think I will have to turn this one up because you won't hear, but you can see the fireworks beginning at the back. That's the noise. It's nowhere near as loud as it really is. And here comes the fireworks. And you'll see me panic. Well, you won't see me panic, but you'll see the camera and myself move. And I'm not easily given to panic. And it was really, really surprising. Now, those elephants are probably habituated to that, but it isn't surprising given all that stress and all that heat and issues with the way they're trained and started. It isn't surprising that there are problems. But to their credit, and that's really through the Wildlife Trust of India and Vivek Menon's great work, things are really changing there. But my question was really about why is it that horse trainers in the West and elephant trainers in the East, or certainly in Southeast Asia, are slow to incorporate the principles of what is known as learning theory? Why is it they're so slow? And the reasons are largely historical. Now, some of you in this room might have seen this slide, but I think we cannot think about this enough, because there was a kind of historical accident that happened to the science of learning theory that never happened to ethology. Ethology arose in Europe through people like Konrad Lorenz and Tinbergen and Leyhausen, and learning theory arose in North America through the likes of Thorndike, Watson and Skinner. And it was going great guns. And it was really, whereas ethology was much more about the study of innate behaviours, learning theory was very much more about precise elements of learning, including positive and negative reinforcement and punishment and shaping and all of those sorts of things. And the trouble was, Skinner and Watson, and particularly Skinner, made the famous remark that with learning theory you could turn a peasant into a lawyer. And that is certainly true, but the problem is that that wasn't appealing to the social conservatives in America in the 1960s. If you can imagine the time of, when there were racial riots and all of those sorts of things, the status quo wasn't to be changed. And Skinner lost his job, and the words operant conditioning never appeared in a paper for many years after that, and many of Skinner's pupils didn't get jobs either. So learning theory took a dive, but ethology never did. And ethology, because it talks about social organisation, basically what it informed us about, it doesn't inform us much about learning, but it informed us about social organisation, and from that we extrapolated hierarchy and dominance and ideas like that. And that's where the dominance frameworks were fertilised in those early years, and we still haven't let go of them. So what happens? How do we make change? And so one model of it is one that's well known, the 4 Rooms of Change by Klaus Jensen. And that, we start off in the contentment room. We're pretty happy with what we do. Let's not rock the boat. Don't change it if it ain't broke. And then if we start to introduce change, quite often there's a period of denial and even anger, and then as well as confusion. But finally, when people accept it, there's renewal. And that's when they come to the new realisation. Now, getting people from this area to there is really the hard part, and that's what we've got to think about it, because in my elephant world, what I have to consider much more than I do in the West are the cultural ramifications of our work. And we've been thinking about that for a long time. And in our early work, I know Mark Pirard came with us early on, and Nikki Stewart is actually chair of our human elephant learning programs, and Nikki was there then too, and we did discuss very much about how we get these changes within the context of the culture. And basically what we do is we just basically explain that it will really help them outside the culture. We even do the ceremonies because it's really important to them. And the thing is, we can really make their life a whole lot better with the elephant. The other part of my journey has been with the horses, has been in teaching and coaching and doing demonstrations with organisations like the British Horse Society. I've been the guest coach a couple of times. Pony Club Australia, I didn't really need another job to be on the board of that, but it's important to do that. And I really wanted to change the syllabus, and they've enabled us to change the syllabus and rewrite a whole new one in the form of learning theory. And we've had a lot of pushback, because introducing ideas like positive reinforcement, I know Portland Jones, Dr. Portland Jones, who has been heavily involved in the syllabus rewrite, when she explained to people what was needing to happen to some of these pony club people, coaches, they were saying, what? So if the horse won't jump the fence, we've got to give him a carrot? You know, even though she explained what it's about, there's quite a lot of road to hoe before we finally get there. But our new syllabus is actually coming out next month, so it's really quite fantastic news. I'm hoping this will happen in other countries too. I've also worked in national federations in many countries. I've been doing demonstrations at the Global Dressage Forum, which has been interesting and really worthwhile to, get to the heartland of the industry of dressage. And that's been, I've been very grateful to them for allowing that to happen. And also presented a revised judging scale, which I'm pleased to say Michael Gurney, where he is, Dr. Gurney is going to collaborate with me to publish that. That's been rolled out. This a more objective judging scale based on learning theory has already been rolled out in the North American Western Dressage Association, with considerable success from both riders and judges, particularly younger judges, of course. And also I do and continue to do many workshops. In the elephant world, our early work was in Nepal, where we began down in Chitwan, and also extended to having a 5-year pilot study in Bardia, which we abandoned after 4 years because it was all working so well, and the vets there said, this is fantastic, now roll it out. Well, we didn't really have the money, so we had to keep going back to try and help them move it out. Money funding is always the big thing, because our Human Elephant Learning Programs Foundation is a not-for-profit charity, so we rely on funding. Interestingly, one of our major funders is the Danish Animal Protection Society. But we also do a lot of fundraisers, and we have donations. In Australia, we're a tax-deductible charity, so that's really great help. But in the other teardrop-shaped markers where we have been working, that's Kerala in the south. We've also been working in Assam, Kaziranga National Park, Manas National Park, also in Thailand, quite a few places in Thailand, more than we're showing there. We've also been working in Myanmar, but we had to stop, of course, when the genocide was happening, but we're hoping to go back soon. And in Laos, and surprisingly, Laos, even though it's quite a poor country, have seen some really nice big changes where they've embraced so much of this new understanding of welfare, and in particular the 5 domains. And I'm going to talk about that as we go. So looking at the 5 domains, this is an iteration of mine of the priorities of the 5 domains. So this is not all about the 5 domains. It's about the things that really matter for horses in particular, and also prioritising certain things that give the horse good welfare. I'm looking really at the difference between what we might call subsistence rather than well-being. Well-being is really what we want to achieve. And when we moved in welfare science from the 5 freedoms to the 5 domains, basically we were moving from understanding what actually cripples animals to now in the 5 domains, what makes their life worth living. And that's a really big step. These positive welfare states that Nat and Haley and many others have talked about as a really recurring theme here, which is wonderful. But these four main areas, apart now down the bottom with all of the important aspects of care, we have the physiological needs. So assuming that they're all accounted for, we need to recognise that animals like horses need to move. And if we restrict their movement, same for dogs, dog trainers, clinicians know that many problems. I know Dr. Doherty here is a dog trainer there in Ireland, and from her I learned the importance of exercise for dogs. That in the absence of movement and exercise, it shows up, it manifests as many behaviour problems. Animals need to move. It's not just something they want to do, they need to do it. And the same thing for foraging and their social needs. They need these things. And in a sense, we can think of it that if we deprive them of it, we make them more insecure. So by making them more secure, we not only improve their welfare, but we also make them actually more rideable, more workable, more comfortable in their life. Because if we have an insecure animal, it's more given to neophobic behaviours. It might shy more, all of those sorts of things. So there's benefits in this, not just for welfare, but for training efficiency as well. The blue one up there, communication and mental stimulation, that's vital, because using learning theory correctly is so important that if we use negative reinforcement, we must do it so well that it shrinks rapidly to the lightest of aids. It's really important that we get our timing right, and that's really what spurned our interest in developing the 10 first principles of training that are on the ISIS website. So that's the horse. Now when we look at the elephant, well, it's exactly the same. We just changed the picture, and it is the same. And some of the work I've been doing last year for a Dutch travel company called Travel Life, which are like an umbrella company that oversee many of the organisations, tour operators for elephant tourism, not just riding, but mostly, feeding and playing with elephants. Travel Life asked me if I would do an audit based on welfare. And in doing that, I started to rewrite that audit and prioritise these things, because it's all very well having, nice things, a nice environment for the elephant, but if we don't privilege the importance to the elephant as it is for the horse, as it is for the human, of social contact. We take it for granted, but we know that when humans are in solitary confinement, it's absolutely hideous for them. And there was a system of, during the worst years of British history, or probably not the worst, but in recent history, the worst years in the mid-1800s, when transportation was happening and people were being shipped out to Australia for all sorts of reasons, like vagrancy as well as stealing sheep and whatever. But vagrancy really is, just you haven't got a home. They developed a system there called the separate system, where prisoners were in solitary confinement, and when they moved out for exercise, they had to have a bag over their head, and they weren't allowed to talk, and the bag was so that they couldn't interact with anybody, and they didn't know who the others were. And this went on for sometimes years. And what they noticed was that people were not only really deranged coming out of this, some were dying, but many of them had even convulsions. And these are well documented. So solitary confinement is a really bad thing for social animals, and there's no reason why we should think it any different for horses or elephants. And when you think about what we do, and we talk about horse personality, we must take into account what we do to horses, even in weaning. When we wean them so early at 6 months, what are we really doing to these animals? We know it's not right to take a baby away from its mother at 6 months and stick it in isolation. There's plenty of evidence of how bad that was for children when they had no contact in orphanages. They were dying like flies. And the importance of that contact is the same for all social animals. We need to really think about that and think about the outcomes. These children were so messed up that often they weren't retrievable. So that may be simply making moves where you might just, as a first step, if they can't see another horse in the stable, just make it so that they can. Or make it so that you can remove the bars and they can even not only see one but touch one and interact and allogroom across the wall. So that's one of the things that we have been looking at. So moving on, what we also have been doing with our work with the elephants, and that's to make the change in Southeast Asia, is teaching them how to train these elephants better. And I'm using these terms combined reinforcement, which I think we should use when we use any amount of pressure, even tactile stimuli on animals, is negative reinforcement, because the removal of it is critical. If it's a signal and you remove it, it's important, because if you don't, what happens? The animal habituates and it doesn't respond to that signal anymore. That qualifies as negative reinforcement. It doesn't have to be bad, it just has to be very light. And when we combine positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement together, which we can do, we call that combined reinforcement. Now, Jana Christensen and myself wrote a paper in 2017 calling, amongst other things, calling for changes in the wording, because negative reinforcement and positive sounds like good and bad. And in some area, and many people assume so, and in some areas of behaviour science, it actually does mean good and bad. Positive and negative welfare states are good and bad welfare states. So that's a bit crazy, so we need to change that. So I'm using these terms, removal reinforcement and addition reinforcement, because I think it describes it so much better, and I think if we started like that, instead of calling it negative and positive reinforcement because of the mathematical construction, we would have actually done better in teaching people. If we said it's about removal reinforcement, make sure you remove it. It's the removal that is the reinforcing agent. The pressure motivates, but the removal or the release trains. And also classical conditioning, understanding just basic elements of classical conditioning about adding the cue before a known response, habituating animals to the things they're scared of with desensitization techniques, and also having very clear shaping scales, because they're critical. That it must be obvious to the animal moving from one step to another. And so in doing that, this is some of the early work we did in Nepal. This was a dressage test this little elephant was doing after our work. And this is really only very early on at the end of the first week. And that is a dressage ring. There's little pegs there for the corner. And he has to go around the corner and then go backwards, do a rein back. You're meant to go backwards, well done. And he gets rewarded for that. He's in the early stages of learning to step backwards. Now he has to go faster, slower, around the corner. Very slow. Very slow. And now faster. I think it's faster. Maybe not. Here it goes. And now another rein back. He's expecting food, because why not? This little elephant won a soccer competition. And there's always a dog, isn't there? There's always got to be a dog somewhere. He's saying to me, what do I do about the dog? Don't do anything about the dog. And this is the same elephant a few years later when we went back. This is just how much he had grown in just 4 years. Now, the signals we use for the elephants are really the same tactile ones as for horses, except in a different place. It's the pressure, light aid pressure of the rider's toes on the ears of the elephant, both ears for forward. The heels draw back onto the shoulder blades for stop and step back, and toes on one ear for turning. So it's very similar to reins and legs for stop and go and turn at a very basic level. Now, people would often ask, why would we train elephants? Well, there's a very good reason that we still do need, even if we don't use them for tourism, I don't think we need to do that anymore, but we do need to use elephants for surveillance of national parks, because there's no better vehicle for catching poachers. And this is a short video made by one of the guys who worked with our Help Foundation. Oops. Ah, here it goes. So elephants are so useful because they're silent. I'll turn that down now. They do go everywhere. They ford river, swamp. Oh, I don't think it's working. Oh, is it there? Yeah. Is it? Oh, is that better? Okay. I got a bit carried away. They go absolutely everywhere. They traverse any terrain. You can see there's the mahout sitting at the front, and there's the guy at the back with the gun, the forest guard. He goes with him, and that's a trainee forest guard as well. And unfortunately, he shoots the poacher, which of course they've been in big trouble from animal rights organisations for actually killing them. But nonetheless, rhino numbers have increased in Manus and Kazaranga National Park as a result, and so have other animals. It's the only place in the world where rhino numbers have increased because people are too scared now to go poaching them. So using elephants is one way. You know, if you use a vehicle, everybody can hear you go or come, and they break down. Elephants are so much better in that regard. And in saying that, the elephants can basically help save themselves. Now, just moving on a bit about our Help Foundation, the Human Elephant Learning Programs. As I mentioned, we're a not-for-profit company. Our work is in training forestry elephants largely in riding, and then we also do a lot of the other work in Thailand and Laos now for tourism, looking at more ethical ways that you can now give people in ecotourism an elephant experience. And that's really the new focus of our work. So that's changed because of the landscape of social license to operate. So we now have, I forgot to add in Laos there, but that's what's happened. And we also, I've written a book called, what's called How to Train an Elephant, basically. And that's now published in quite a few languages. Now, moving on, when we use combined reinforcement, I just thought I'd show you a couple of short videos. Sorry. That is negative reinforcement, and I'm okay with it. So this little elephant at the top right-hand corner here, I like this video because it shows that the elephants have a choice. And so I was teaching the mahouts to reward the elephant for just touching a bag, because the bag would be used to put on their back to ride them because they've got really spiky skin. And you'll see the elephant making his choices and learning. This was a promotional video, that's why it's got the wording on it. We use this for our fundraisers. And he says, I'll turn the sound up. Sabash means well done in Assamese. And he's just rewarding the elephant for the early stages, just touching the bag. And this is on the Monday morning. And it doesn't look like we're making that much progress. We're really just wanting the elephant to make a reaction to touch the bag. We sometimes use clickers, but they keep losing them. So I think they give them to their kids to play with. But this is just this is 5 sessions later. And then he gives him food. And here he misses. No. They are really good shots with their trunk. Now you watch him make his choice. I think he thinks he's had enough. Pick it up. In southern India, in order to be asked back to that part of the world, we had to have this say-so from the authorities in the national park, the equivalent to the mayor, and so we thought what we would do is teach the elephant through positive reinforcement to put a laurel of flowers around my neck, and then he would do that for him, and he did, and we ended up getting asked back. So these guys really love this, and that was about 30 minutes of training, and the guys there, although they'd never done positive reinforcement, they've only got to see it as doing the things that they couldn't do before easily. They just love it, and it makes the elephant safe. We are really the only people in Southeast Asia that do free contact training. We're underneath the elephant and we never get hurt. Much of it is now protected contact, but we need to do it because we're teaching the mahouts how to do it. And they're the ones that are going to be interacting with them over all this time. And so when the vets come to have to treat the elephant, we want them to be safe for the vets. Yeah. So the future, looking at the future, Equitation Science, of course, offers us our future for horses. And you've heard this before from Cami earlier, you know, what it is. It's all about the science of human-horse interactions. It's basically a multidisciplinary science. It includes so many different sciences, and so it should, because we really can't get to understand what we're doing unless we understand a lot about not only the elephant but also ourselves and our interactions. And importantly, it identifies what can be defined and what can be measured. In elephants, our work with the Help Foundation is setting up mahout training schools, and so we have this set up in Laos now already, and we're beginning to do this in Thailand as well, and they're really good fun. We're hoping that it would eventually result in being able to give them some feeling of esteem through having a diploma in elephant husbandry, including all of those subjects there that I've listed. And my work there has enabled me to now be asked by the IUCN to be on the Species Survival Commission board for the Asian elephant, which is a really good move to have someone there involved with the elephant's life in human-elephant interactions, not just in ecology. Now, I've also been working with the Greater Manchester Police, and through Lisa Ashton's work as well there, and in getting me to be able to go there, and that's been very enjoyable. And what they did over these number of workshops, as they're beginning to get the idea of what welfare, good welfare is all about, you know, about giving the animals the ability to communicate and allo-groom, they basically pulled their walls down, the bars, and the results were really very interesting and quite fantastic. The positives and I asked them to be dead honest because they're monitoring this. I want to know what was good and what was bad, because there's no use doing it if it's really bad, but it's been very good. The positives are they feel they've got happier horses and therefore happier people, because one goes with the other. A whole lot more horse-horse interaction. One difficult horse called Steel, who used to kick the doors, doesn't do it anymore because he can be with his mates. These are fairly simple solutions, and the staff are so much happier. On the negative side, they said in the beginning there were some problems. Now, some of these horses have never really been with other horses before, so of course you would expect some. There's been the odd bite and a bit of argy-bargy. Some of the grooms were worried in the beginning, and also importantly, as one of the talks earlier mentioned, that we do need to understand who they get along with, because it's not just a matter of saying you have to be with this one. It's good to know if they can tell us who they get along with, and that can be done in other group situations where you can find this out. But that's been very successful. In Laos, the same thing has happened, where they've moved through the work with the 5 domains to also put the elephants into an open enclosure, so taking the chains away from these elephants. Some of them have been in chains and isolated for 40 years. So the challenges were great. You know, how do you find the night enclosure? They had to buy the land. It's a beautiful enclosure. That's not a very good picture. I asked Michael to send me a good one, but it's not very nice. But it's actually got a waterfall. Not that that matters for an elephant, I know. But there's a big pool there where they can go into the water and play, and it's got a lot of differences in the terrain. So that's been a great thing and a great move forward. And so tourists can go there and see these elephants in that state, and then they come out of the night enclosure. They walk 7 kilometres, which is good because they get exercise all together in a nice big family group, and tourists can interact with them, and they feed them their normal diet, not sugar. So I think that's a very world-class place. And the positives that they tell me are that it did take a couple of weeks for them to relax, but they sleep well, they eat well, and they interact with each other, which, it's hard to measure how they really feel about that, but obviously that would be a great plus. And the mahouts are so much happier now, and the elephants are calmer. On the negative side, they were confused, of course, when they were first led into this enclosure, when you've been isolated for 40 years. And so they didn't sleep well at first, and there was a bit of bullying like there was with the horses, and some were grumpy in the daytime. And also, you can't really give them the acres that they need. So they haven't eaten it out. There's plenty of trees there. It's a really nice enclosure, but they've basically eaten a lot of stuff that they choose to eat. So their diets have been restricted, not in the amount of food, just in the diversity of it. So they had more diverse food when the village was supplying the elephants when they were chained with more diverse food. So that is a downside, but all they need to do now is to fix that, and that will be a whole lot better. So our basic work with these elephants, I'm going back to the under-saddle work back in India, just to mention what we do. When we shape the way we train them, just to teach them about shaping, it's just really a 6-step thing. So it's quite easy to teach them. It's not difficult. We basically established, first of all, a single step of stop and forwards, backwards and turning. And we give them a little tap with a stick to get them to lift legs and do things, and then we start with positive reinforcement immediately. And doing that makes us really safe because as I said, we just have not been injured. We haven't seen any anger in these elephants during this training, and we've been doing it a long time now. It's been going since 2006. The second step is, we then increase the amount of steps, the continuous movement. We then habituate them to a mahout on the elephant's back. So it's very much, I basically crossed out the word horse and wrote elephant in this. Then the handler on the ground still controls the elephant while the rider is now sitting passively on the elephant's back. And then by classical conditioning, the rider now takes over the cues and gives the elephant a touch on the ears for turning or for go or for stop and step back, and gradually build it up like that. And then the person on the ground fades away and the person on the back is now in control. And it's really quite fast. We can usually do this in 5 days. So 2 sessions a day. They're not long sessions. They're 20 to 30 minutes, never longer than 30 minutes. And the elephant tells us how much when he's had enough. And then back to Lao. This is my last slide. I think I am right on time. And this is Michael Vogler, before I do get him going. Well, this little elephant, I'll take this away so you can see him, but this little elephant here, Kit, was the reason I went to Lao. Now, that's really the reason I go anywhere. When I first start with horses, my journey around the world is because someone has a problem horse. My work in England has been with horses with problems in dressage or cross-country or whatever, and that's been how it all happens for me. And that's really what I like to do, because it's a really good game changer to show them how they can do what they can't do. It's a good way of introducing learning theory when you can show them in a way that's not offensive, that it's just more tools. You can give them more tools and another way of doing it. And then you can say, incidentally, you can also improve your work and make the horse more, or the elephant, more confident by doing these other things. So I went to see Kit, and Kit was a dangerous little elephant. It's a young male. You can't see it, sorry. There he is. You can see his little tusks there, but he was a very tough little customer and was actually hitting people with his trunk and pushing people around. So I went there to teach Michael, who had no idea about using combined reinforcement. Oh, thank you. No idea about using combined reinforcement, and he was worried that he was going to get hurt, and everybody else was worried he was going to get hurt. So we taught Kit how to do certain things. There were some interesting moments where we were in the pen and Kit was on the outside, and Kit decided that he would like all the bananas, and he actually just barged his way and broke all the fences. Now he's in the pen with about 4 tourists and 3 of us members of help, and it was a little bit chaotic as he was sort of snatching the bag and saying, "Give me all the bananas." But anyway, what the main issue was think his movement. Now, I know that so many of the horse people here would know, because we've already talked about that, and I think that's what Kate Fenner was showing us the other day, about getting control of the horse's legs. It's such a big thing. When the horse was giving all sorts of other behaviours, she just gets control of the horse's legs, and we just get control of the elephant's legs. There's a good reason for that too, neurologically, because the locomotory, the part of the brain that basically reinforces locomotion, the substantia nigra, runs on dopamine. And it's got the biggest dopamine use in the brain. So getting control of the legs is really vital. So if they are in control of their own legs, they are highly rewarded for it. And if we do, that's our way of establishing calmness, because it does certainly make them calm. So teaching him to simply stop was one thing, as well as move backwards and forwards. So I better turn the sound up, because you can hear him say, the timing's not always perfect, but he's getting the hang of it. I do leave them to do their practice rather than just be in their ear the whole time. And I just come back and after a few minutes and say, right, now let's do it this way, because it doesn't work so well to be just at them and saying, no, that's bad timing, because you end up punishing the person. So they've got to feel it a little bit themselves and explore it. And as long as their timing's not too bad, it's good. And then we just talk about it and get them to improve. How means stand still. And he's using a clicker. He doesn't lose any clickers, so that's good. Toi means go back in Lao. That's put your foot on the block. Yo, put your foot on. So we taught him all of these things. Oh, and the other foot, well done. So it really is, I think that's probably what Shauna will be showing you tomorrow, but it is a lot of fun to do it this way, but it's also very effective, because when you do it this way, it's safer as well. But what we have to be careful of is that some animals, and we see this particularly with elephants, and this is really my final slide, some animals do show more aggression. And with animals like elephants, where they're not domestic, because then they're not bred in captivity by and large. Sometimes they will, in some parts of India, choose which female they would like to be mated with the wild bull, which is always the case. The wild bull comes in. So there's probably a little bit of selective breeding, but really not much. And it's generally accepted that they're not a domestic animal. So they have a short fuse. So we need to be cautious about food off quite quickly. And we reward them on a variable schedule after a while. And this is my finishing remark, because I can feel I'm being crept upon. A comparative ethology approach can really help inform us. Get people to understand that horses are not special in the way they learn. It's an animal. People learn the same way. You can do it to your family. I do it to my grandchildren. You know, it's great. You can, you know, discrimination reversals for a 2-year-old are really fun. You put a peanut under a jar and no peanut into that jar, as long as the parents aren't around. But it is good. The interspecies approach is really a really valuable approach to getting people to understand the universality of learning theory. And in that way, I think we can improve welfare by having better training and encouraging people to come into that space of training and seeing that their toolbox is actually broader than they think. Thank you very much.